just want to see it for the whole world to see.
Yep.
They said, you know, we're going to put the person who's been here the longest on the screen today.
Exec session, and this is more of a conversation for what you want to cover, whether that's public
Right. Oh, no, that's going to be private. That's, yeah, I always disagree.
Morning. So we can probably discuss all of them, come out and just vote on those two.
Yep.
Oh, wait, on a quorum, is that what we're doing? Hey, how are you?
Agreement.
How are you?
And,
Waiting for the quorum.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Oh, yeah.
I love to keep you fresh in the morning, like, hey, we're gonna be.
One more. Robert or Ron or Larry or Mike. Whoever.
That's Robert Brooks, so now we have.
We just stuck out for a second, but he is here.
Yourself.
We have a quorum.
Okay.
Maybe not, but we have a quorum with those four, so.
So we'll defer approval of this.
Quorum if we have.
Oh, we do? Yeah, Paul's here. Yeah.
Brooks was.
Justin drove him over.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is Paul here?
I'm a personal driver.
Yeah.
Paul's fine.
I got him here safely, we're all good, okay?
Was that,
Just in the nick of time.
which light did you turn on?
He does not pay.
Oh, he doesn't, oh, that's great.
All right, you know, Justin, we know where you're at.
Oh, sorry, boss, I didn't know you were here.
Paul, you could at least throw him some gas money. What the heck?
We're live.
All right, welcome to the October Finance Committee meeting for the Lehigh Northampton Airport Authority. Is there any public comment?
No, sir.
No public comment. Let's do a roll call, please.
Sure. Frank Facciano,
Here?
Paul Anthony,
Here.
Robert Brooks.
Here.
John Hayes,
Here.
Ron Heckman, Larry Hemberger, Mike Stershik. We do have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Okay, so welcome. There's no public comment. I'm looking for a motion to approve the meeting minutes from our September meeting. Ms. Paul?
Second.
John? In favor? Aye.
Aye.
And now we're going to hear the financials from Todd for September.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Can always start off with Go Phils.
Absolutely. Red October.
There we go. All right, I always start off with the traffic. We've kind of surpassed the 90,000 days, but still relative to September months, we had a very good month. We were slightly ahead of September 2019, as you can see there in the green. Still lagging behind some on the legacies down here, but Allegiant is still going strong. But you can see up top there was really kind of the breakdown of what's going on, you know, as far as our traffic. Allegiant, obviously crew base and all, is taking us really over the top, but legacy traffic is still lagging behind. This kind of shows that we've actually surpassed year-to-date traffic for 2019. We're at 693, and we were at 690 in 2019.
In terms of the legacy volume, are we hearing anything from those carriers in regard to restoring routes or anything of that nature, or is it status quo for the time being?
We're not, I think what we're hearing is, you know, basically monthly schedule changes still happening throughout their networks, just as a result of continuing to rebuild for the demand that's out in the market that they just don't have the capacity for yet.
So, always compare our traffic to all other airports, and you can see seats, all airports are down slightly, not quite even -1%, we're down 3.6. Throughput, actually going through the checkpoint, 2.8 for all airports, and we're at -3.7, so we're not that far off. But when you compare us to our peers, obviously we're doing pretty well. Our peers are doing about 20% less. And if you really think about that number, that -20, it's consistent with our legacy traffic. So that legacy traffic, because they didn't have a crew base right before the pandemic, we would probably be in the same boat had we done the crew base well before. We would be talking about us down 20% from a much higher number. But you can see we're roughly 3.7 on our throughput and our seats, much better than our peers. Our peers are probably a little jealous of us at this point. Then for the month, no cares, always talk about without cares, just kind of thinking about in the future at some point we'll run out of cares. But net income, 192K. Overall revenue is really what generated it, always a good thing. Parking revenue, yay team, and again, it's a revenue base, and that's always gets me excited and not cutting expenses. Then year to date, you can see pretty favorable. Obviously, the numbers look really good, but if you remember where we were when we did our budget last year, we were kind of like, I don't know, because traffic was a little bit more, not as predicted as highly as it is. So it was a lot more challenges at that time. So the fact that we're doing a lot better than budget is giving us some flexibility, which we'll talk about later. But again, very good year-to-date numbers. Actually, I think we have our highest overall operating revenue in 9 months that we've ever had without cares. Without cares. So that just shows you that we've kind of rebounded.
Highest revenue?
I don't know what you mean.
Highest operational revenue. Again, it's nice to see, we always talk about the profit centers, we included them all in here so we don't miss anything out. But first time since before the pandemic that you see that there's actually something ahead of CARES that's a #1 profit center. So it's nice that CARES isn't at the top anymore. So again, as we get back to being fully supportive of ourselves without CARES, it's nice to know that CARES is moving down the line. Salaries, again, we'll talk about some of that when we talk about the budget slides. Aviation services, parking, and so you can see what makes up that big deficit, and then you have another 58K of other smaller things that make up that big variance. You can see here, breaking it out by personnel and non-personnel. You can see that number is, -12 year to date, and non-personnel -7. Again, we probably expect to see some of those non-personnel expenses go up, especially when we get into the winter months with the utility bills and all that, which we know are probably going to be at least 50% higher than they were. So again, it's nice to have a little bit of a running start, and some of this stuff on the expenses you're going to see going into next year, because we're seeing it on all of our renewals and all of our other stuff. So a lot of these increases in expenses you're going to see going kind of flowing into next year's budget.
On the personnel side, how many openings do we still have?
I'll talk about that when we do the budget. I actually have a different way of looking at it, and we'll talk about that some, and you can really follow that.
Okay.
But you can see, even though we're down -12 versus budget, you can see that versus last year actual, we're up pretty significantly as far as actual personnel costs. So we actually are up, we just aren't up as much as we budgeted. Then I'll just talk about cash flow. A lot of the changes in yellow, a lot more than usual, because those are kind of anticipating what we have in our initial budget. Some of our early numbers are out there, and we're using them kind of going forward.
Can you go back a slide one?
Go back one.
No, it might be a couple of slides.
This one?
Yeah. I was just looking at the debt services. Debt service, they're in like negatives now?
The debt services is a minus.
Right. Does that mean that it's all paid up or?
No. I mean, we're starting with revenue, and everything else is a negative off of that number. So if you look at the top, like number 2, we have net revenue, and then I'm just showing as a negative. Obviously, it comes off the top as expenses, a reduction on that revenue. Everything is just kind of reducing the cash. So that's just kind of how it is. So we have revenue, which is kind of a positive, and then you have everything else that's reducing the cash.
But how are you doing eliminating that debt?
I'm not really sure what your question is, so make sure I follow that.
I'm just gonna, I'll ask you later about it then.
I mean, we have debt service. It's almost like a mortgage.
Yeah.
They ain't going away no time soon, And actually, if you go down to lines 9 and 10, we're actually gonna have more with the connector. So-
Right. I thought there was like a grant that we were getting to help that. Or am I just wrong? I could be.
I mean,
There is, but there's still debt associated with the project as well.
Oh,
It's both.
Okay, so it's both?
yes, yeah, and thank you for clarifying it. Again, I mean, we got about 15 million of fixed loans, that project's well over $30 million. So that 15 million you'll see on the debt number, but the other pieces are what we get grants for. We can get grants on the entire amount.
Okay, I guess I wanted to know the impact.
So the 7 and 8, just for clarification, 7 and 8 are existing debts.
Yeah.
Okay,
Connected.
and actually, since you brought that up, you can see that in December, it goes down. You see that? From December to January, because remember, we had to pay extra. I'm glad you brought that up, so I remind people that weren't here. We had to pay extra because we deferred some debt in 2020 when CARES came in. So we had a higher debt service, about $1 million more this year, 2022, but that goes away in 2023. All right, and then the hangar, and then obviously connector, what we're paying in the bridge. The adjustments there, special cares, and talk about that number down there, line 24. Right now, we have approximately $1,029,000 left over that we were going to draw from CARES for this year. We're actually going to push that back to next year to help us with some of the demolition. And we got some huge expenses on demolition. We're expecting about a 1.7 million in between now and 2024, about $1 million that we have projected for 2023. So we're going to use that next year to kind of help with that number. Since we're ahead of budget, why use the money now? And just for clarification, part of the reason we moved to CARES, normally you can't move revenue. It's not something you can move from year to year, but CARES is different. So it's when we're drawing it. And CARES, if we pay it in this year, what happens is it will probably go back to the airlines because it would be an overage. So anything we pay over, we have to give back to them because we act out the cost. So that's part of the reason we never took all that money all up front. And I'll talk about that some more. If anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in. Again, kind of going through, seeing all the changes. You can see kind of the things that anticipated there for cash reserves going up, contingencies going up, and we were at the 59,000. Early estimate is about 67,200 for the 2023 budget, and that also includes about $1 million of debt service, of demolition. So that's a lot, about $2,500. And remember, I gave you 65,000 before, so that extra $1 million is really the difference of why we're a lot higher than I gave you before. But you can see down there on line 33 that you can see that we're staying in a pretty good place even going forward with that higher number. But you can see we stay well above our 60-day number down there, which is in black. But you can see it fluctuates. I think our lowest number is 162 at this point. And some of that is just because of the timing of some of these grants. We're finding that the RACP grants are very slow. Very slow. So, any questions? I know it's a lot, so go ahead.
And that's the number for next year, as far as per day, 67,200?
67,200, yes. So even though we don't have to do it this year, it's just kind of projecting out where we're, and that 6,700 is after reserves and contingencies. So we can breathe a little bit, but that black line represents 60 days where we say we never want to go below that line at all. Any other questions? I know it's a lot of information, but it kind of leads into some of the budget discussions. Okay, thank you.
All right, we want to accept the statements for presentation to the board tomorrow. Motion?
Sure. I'll motion.
Paul?
Second.
John? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, we're going to have an operating budget update. Todd, you're back.
All right. I don't have to say go Phils again, right?
Yes, you do.
Okay. All right. We always go through our budget discussion early, and then we'll do the final budget next month where we think we are. And this is kind of some preliminary numbers of where we are in our budget as of last week. So we always start out, this is our vision, to be fiscally responsible, strategic, and manage expectations. I always have managed expectations because we have a lot more needs than we have money. So everybody says, hey, you got all this money. You got to manage everybody's expectations, understand that this isn't an endless pot. We have to make sure that we manage expectations. Our goals, obviously, we're a big infrastructure, so we have to make sure our infrastructure is up to snuff, and that's maintaining safety and our long-term vision, making sure all of our structures are working properly, meeting our minimum debt service, which is 1.25, continuing to invest in our future, which is our organization, people, and infrastructure. And then remain flexible using the CARES. And we had approximately 18 million that we've been awarded in CARES. And we're down to about a little over 7 million. And we're trying to plan that out. I mean, next year was supposed to be 3, but we threw in another mill for the construction from this year. And then the following year, down to 2, and then down to 1 for the final year. So kind of weaning off of that to help us kind of manage our budget as we go through. And this is kind of some of the revenue assumptions and where we are. It's a revenue-based budget. We talk about 4.1. Like I said, a lot of that is the moving of money, that $1 million from one year from 2022 to 2023. See our estimate. You can see our estimated passenger flights, and you can see that we're at 6461. We had 5938 budgeted in 2022. Then the estimated 446K of passengers. We budgeted 414 this year. We're running a little bit higher than that. But you can see our Allegiant percentages, obviously, pretty high. You can see where we are there. But it gets into what's in our assumptions. I mean, we really pushed our numbers as far as revenue this year as much as we can. Obviously, expenses are going up pretty fast. So we're doing what we can, but obviously we have to be considerate of what that's going to do to what we charge the airline, because they are conscious of rates. Just kind of breaking down some of the stuff, the icing and fuel, we were getting hit pretty hard. And we have a projected 5%, it might be more, but that's what we put in the budget for July on the parking. We haven't increased our parking rates in well over a decade, so it's getting close to time.
Just out of curiosity, the de-icing revenue increase at 25%, is that cost of the chemical used versus projecting more ice?
No, that's the cost of the chemical to cover our cost. So the spread doesn't really change. Right. It actually might go down. But yeah. So part of the reason we didn't put the FTEs, because that seems to be something that's generating a lot of discussion. So we actually wanted to talk about full-time employees, and then I still have my FTEs. So you can just kind of follow this, because I know we've had a lot of discussions about this. So, our budget, and you can see there where I'm looking at, I should put a column at the top, under where it says period, and then it says FTE. So, for our preliminary budget, we had 232 FTEs, and that's full-time equivalents. In most businesses, we only talk about full-time because you don't have so many part-time people. But we use full-time equivalents because we have so many part-time people, and they work multiple hours, and it's just to kind of make everything on apples to apples. But it's really important to focus on the full-time employees, because that's where the meat on the bone is. So you can see, and you can see there on the top there, we have 162 full-time employees in our preliminary budget. This year's budget, we had 155, and in 2021's budget, we had 144. So you can see that the total employees, the 324 versus the 162, that difference is part-time and seasonal employees. You can see how many they are. That's what I'm saying. It's hard to kind of quantify that difference there, because when you think of an employee, you think of a full-time employee, but there's a lot of part-time employees. We got part-time employees that work every other weekend. We got part-time employees that work 20 hours. So you can see 162, and our total employees are 324. You see that? That budget up the top there. That's what the preliminary budget is. See that up there?
Mm-hmm. So half our employees are full-time.
Half of our employees are full-time, and half of them are part-time in our budget right there.
Yeah, more than half.
Yeah, so that is exactly half, isn't it?
Yeah, close.
No, it's not close, it's exactly half, but anyway. So then you go down to the bottom there, you can see actual, and that's actually October 7th, 2022. You can see full-time employees, we had 146. So compare that to any other actuals, you can see those numbers are going up pretty well. Like, again, you can see in 2021, for the same period, we had 129. And actually, the last pay period, which was Friday, we actually have 150 full-time employees. So we're getting close. The part-timers are going to come and go. It's the full-timers that are with the meat on the bone. And what you can do with some of the part-timers is you could just extend the hours. Because again, it fluctuates. So we put a lot of them in there, but it's really hours on part-time employees because they can fluctuate. But does everybody follow that? Because it gets a little confusing because we have so many part-time employees.
So are part-timers one half of a full-time in this?
Not really, no, it's truly hours. When I do FTEs, it's hours. So a part-time person could work 10 hours a pay period, or they could work 55. They would count, and then it divides it by 40, or 40 a week.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter, you don't say a half, you use the actual hours. That's how you come up with FTEs. So it's different than body count, but it kind of makes everything even. Like, how many hours did you think you needed to get the job done? Full-time and then other part-timers. And that's why we use the FTEs. Does that make sense, everybody? Because again, most businesses, you go, well, why don't you just tell me the full-time employees? We got so many part-timers, you kind of have to factor that in there. Otherwise, it's a little confusing. And you have to kind of level it out. Like you just said, hey, well, do you put them all in at 20? No, I don't. I put them in at the hours that they actually work. And they go up and down depending on the business. That's why we need them.
So, hey, Todd, you have a lot of numbers up there.
Okay. Thank you.
Just trying to but your the column says percentage versus 2019 actual.
Yes.
Why do we use 2019 as our base?
2019 we're using as our base because that was before the pandemic, the last full year before the pandemic.
It was like the last full season.
Right,
Yeah.
full season of regular business.
They call it normal, Paul.
Right, normal, right. So that's why we're using that as our normal.
So normal is 2019, okay.
All right.
That make sense?
No, yeah, no.
Well, no, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah.
Because again, everything is based on, even when we go and show our traffic, it's versus 2019 because that was before COVID. So we had a normal business cycle. That make sense? Any other questions? I mean, we went over this. I know it's a lot of numbers, I apologize, but I wanted to put it all out there so you can just follow. We are growing. It's just, we had a dip during COVID, but we've kind of picked back up. And if you go even during COVID, if you go there down to 2020, down at the bottom there, as go down a little bit to that, down, keep going down, under actuals for that pay period. So you go to 2020, we're at 127, and we were at 134, in 19. So it wasn't a big dip as far as full-time, and that's just, all right, you know what I'm saying? So, and then we went right back up to 129.
Well, so the only thing that's not up there is the total part-time employees.
Right, I mean, you could just subtract one from the
I
other.
asked that question.
Right.
So but it's not just twice as many, it's as full-time. It's something else based on the actual hours.
Well, the actual count of employees would be the difference between one
Yeah.
versus the other. But the FTEs would count in, so the best way to look at it is, an FTE is, let's say, a full-time person.
Yes.
He works 40 hours, okay? So that's one. Okay, I'm gonna say, sorry, Tom, I know nobody works 40 hours in here, but I'm just gonna say for the purpose of argument, it's 40 hours.
I think I get paid.
Right, but let's just say Dawn,
Tara?
thank you, this is one of those mornings. Are working, they're both working 20, okay?
I know, believe me.
All right, that would be another FTE, because they're both working 20. And then if you four gentlemen are working 10 hours each, that's another FTE.
So the total employee count is 324.
Total employee count of 324.
So it really is.
But what,
162
232 is the.
is
40
is that blended
it's
based on.
40 hours
part-time
for times, basically 40 times
So body count, there's
232.
162 full-time, 162 part-time.
Yes,
Body count.
yes.
Right now, today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
But if you took the hours and you said, hey, what's the average hours at FTE, you would take 232 times 40 times 52. That would be the total hours that you would have roughly.
Yeah.
Okay?
And I get it.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Again, they're just trying to make everything an apples to apples. It's because, you know, a lot of times people when you have part-timers, they all work the same amount of hours. That's not the way it works here. We got all kind of schedules with part-time.
FTE is really the only way.
The only way to kind of show it on an apples to apples,
I
right?
get why we use it.
Because you could say, hey, how many do you have? Well, is that person, like if you need 10 part-time employees, they could all be 10-hour-a-week people. Or they could be 20-hour-a-week people, you don't know. So that's where it gets confusing. All right. Well, hopefully we're done with that.
Can we go back to that slide?
You are joking, right? Okay. Assumptions, these are just our assumptions here. Wage increases, 2.7 to 3, that's kind of what's in the CBA, what they have in their CBAs, and what we're thinking we're gonna do for the 9 unions. So that kind of, it's just that mix, it's just a small mix. And mostly everybody's at 3, with the exception of the police, because their agreement says 2.75. The rest of the stuff is, again, look at 4, that's always one that has me concerned. We did not adjust it based on what the Farmer's Almanac says for this year, but that number is based on an average snowfall event. I mean, snow is very costly to the airport. So if we have a really bad winter, it gets really expensive for us, and that's a concern. But we just based on an average winter, and, you know, just take it as it comes.
All right, Todd, I need to ask about the bonus pool.
Okay?
I'm new to the board.
No,
What's the
that's
bonus
fine.
pool?
The bonus pool, what we do at the end of the year, it's just something we do around Christmas time for all of our employees. And we just put a placeholder of 1% based on how we do during the year. So it's just kind of like a Christmas bonus that we do at the end of the year.
So 1% of somebody's salary,
1% of all the employee salaries.
right, whether you're full-time,
Mhm.
part-time.
Yeah, that's kind of put in there, yep.
So if you're a part-time employee, you get the same bonus as somebody who's full-time?
It would be based on your,
Based on your,
right, so 1% of your salary.
oh, okay, because,
Right.
okay, the way that you said that, I thought you pooled all the salaries together, took 1% of that, and then gave that to everybody. No.
No, it's 1%, it's based on, right, it's just, yeah, right. And again, no, go ahead.
So where do you put that in your budget, in the line item? Under what?
It would be under personnel.
Under personnel?
It would be under salaries and wages.
Okay.
And actually, that would not show usually until December.
Right, yes.
Yeah, right, I mean, so it's in there for the annual number, but when you go into month to month, that doesn't show until December. And again, that's a placeholder that we put in there. If we do better, we make it a little higher. If during 2020, we have it. So, you know, really just kind of a placeholder depending on how we do business. And it's kind of something we do across the board, union or non-union, that's just what we do. Okay, and this is to give you, and actually last year, I think what we did was based it on hours, just to make it easier to, you know, we did it based on hours. It was easier to do it, but same concept. Then you get down there to the contributions for the medical, and just going up on the non-union, everything else is per the CBAs. Pretty much everybody's in a qualified high deductible plan with the exception of the Teamsters. But again, these numbers are pretty small as far as contributions. Again, every consultant that we bring in here wants to work here.
Are we self-insured or
Yes.
fully insured?
We're self-insured.
And then we have stop loss. I'm assuming.
We could not be self-insured without a stop loss. We're not big enough to.
If you're big enough, you could.
Yeah, but we're not that big. Yeah, we can do it. And our stop loss, the way we do it, I'm glad you brought up the question, is we are 115% as an aggregate and 65,000 on our specific. So a specific claim, anything over 65, we have pure insurance. Anything on an aggregate level over 115, we have insurance on.
Who do you use for stop loss?
We are going through the Benetcon Consortium. I think we're with PIMIC. PIMIC is part of that, is who uses our stop loss.
Yes, you use Benetcon.
Yeah.
And then for our, obviously the platform, who do you use, like Capital?
Capital, yep, we're using Capital.
Have you ever shopped outside of Benetcon?
We always shop. We're actually hearing proposals from Equinox and some others. It's just trying to kind of work through the design of some of that stuff. So
Is that yearly, or do you have a 3-year contract?
No, I mean, in order for us to switch plans, we have to give them notice, because we're part of the consortium, we have to give them notice in June. Even though our renewal was 1/1, and then we kind of say, hey, we're hanging out, we're looking. So we do that maybe every other year. We've done it this year, and we're looking at some stuff to see what makes sense. You know, obviously, some of our agreements are very specific about what's in there, so we got to be mindful of that, what we want, because people want some great stuff. Now, one of the reasons we were thinking about leaving Benetcon is where there's a lot of direct deals coming to employers that we can't get through them. You know, like, for example, Lehigh Valley is giving direct discounts to employers. If you go through them, we can't really do that. And, you know, I mean, in the insurance term, they have the concept of the claims are the claims. Well, if those claims are overinflated, I want some of my money. And that's really where some of these rebates and some of that stuff, we really want to tap into those as much as we can. But again, we always want to be mindful of the benefits that we're offering to our employees and what's in their contracts. And, you know, we talk about the qualified high deductible plan, but we have healthy rewards that goes under there. There's an HSA that goes with that, which is pretty nice. I mean, those rewards are pretty robust.
Right, so you said claims are claims, so the 8% increase on the medical is just on claims.
It's on the whole dollars, but most of it was.
Yeah, it's usually for stop-loss claims, admin fees.
Yeah. I mean, but the admins didn't go up as much, but the overall cost went up 8. I think
Admin shouldn't go up.
yeah, but it go up 8. I think it went up some, but yeah, it did.
It shouldn't go up.
Because what they're doing on our admin is they're rolling in the discounts on the RX, so they call it a negative admin fee, which is bogus.
Benetcon, your RX, I'm assuming?
Yeah. Okay.
One thing to keep in mind as you're going through that is, and I've seen this with a couple of companies with this year's renewals, they had high deductible plans and then self-insurance for that high deductible for their employee, and it was cheaper to go back to a low deductible plan. It absolutely amazed me, and we're one of them. So it's something to keep in mind is you make sure you're looking at all options and not taking something off the table just because you think it won't work, because with what's going on in the insurance world right now, things work that didn't work last
So
year.
you're talking about going back to fully insured?
No, I'm talking about, you've got a high deductible plan up here.
I see what you're saying.
We had at the bank a high deductible plan, and then we self-insured the deductible for our employees. Because it was cheaper to do that than to pay the premium on a low deductible plan. So, but this year with our renewal, it's cheaper to go back to a low deductible plan.
Well, we really don't self-insure below what the employee pays. We don't. They just get money into an HSA. So it's a little different than what you're talking
Yep.
about. Our plan, right, we can always talk about the plan, but because we're self-insuring the whole thing. Now, what you're talking about is someone will just say, hey, we'll do that ourselves below that. We're self-insured on the whole thing. It's just employees have money going into a bank account they can use for whatever purposes they feel for medical purposes. But we always are on
My point is just make sure you're not operating under pre-existing assumptions because they could be wrong.
No, I agree with you. We're always looking at,
It is
everything changes, yeah.
Do their HSAs roll over into the next year? Like
HSAs are employees' money, so they can take it with them. It's not like a FSA where it ends at the end of the year or 6/30 or whatever I think the date is. You can carry over. Employers have the option on an FSA because that's employer money. They give you the ability, I think it's up to, I want to say 6/30, don't quote me on that. But
I just got my letter.
Right, 6/30 for the next year. That's up to the employer. They don't have to do that. But that's the employer's money. So that's different. And the difference is when an FSA, the employer fronts the money. So that's different than HSA is your money, and if you leave, it rolls over the next, that's what's just nice. You don't have to worry about it at the end of the year going, oh my God, I need to spend all my money, I'm gonna lose it. It just carries over, and it's a pretty nice thing. Any other questions? I really enjoy all the questions. This is fun. Okay. All right. We base our new employees on employee and child. We didn't get another increase on our dental. I mean, that was a good move for us. We switched a few years back from Guardian to Met. We got a better plan, lower price, and they haven't increased the rates in 3 years, 4 years.
Are you self-insured there also?
No, we're not self-insured on the dental.
Insured.
Fully insured. Again, like I said, we got a pretty nice plan, and we haven't had an increase on that. We just hold kind of a 2% for unemployment. That's just a placeholder. We do not encumber that, so that's just kind of held. Normally, we don't spend 2%, except for COVID time when things change. But normally, 2% is we don't spend that much on unemployment. But we are self-funded, And then workman's comp, which is, something we're working on as well. Then you talk about self-funded. We brought that up a lot. There's a lot of information on here. I saw Frank's head go back like that. We are self-funded. So back to Paul's point, we pay the full amount, which is 115 during the year, and then whatever surplus shows as a negative in the following year. So just for budgeting purposes, we don't have to worry about, hey, if we blow it, we pay the maximum every month, and then whatever money that we get back, which we should get back because we're paying more than we should, because if we're supposed to pay $1, which is the dollar is the claim, and we pay 115, that's our maximum threshold, we pay 115, if it comes in $1, we should get our 15 cents back. So we get it in the following year, and then we just show that as a negative expense in the following year. So for example, last year, we got $234,000 back, but we don't get the money back until the following year. So that's in this year's, we got the $234,000 back. That shows as a negative reduction on our medical expenses for this year. That makes sense?
No.
Hmm?
No. So you have stop loss insurance, and you're
Yep.
saying you pay, so the claims, you pay up to 115,000. Anything?
Not 115,000, 115%.
Oh, really?
So there's two kinds of insurance.
Yeah,
There's the specific, this is for people that don't speak insurance.
I don't either, but just.
But there's a specific level, which is for any individual claim, you, your spouse. There's two kinds of risk, right? If you self-insure, obviously, you can get blown away with two kinds of risk. You can get blown away where there's a really big claim by one person or more than one person. Like somebody could have $1 million claim. They could blow you away. So 65,000 says you're only charged up to 65,000, and then everything else is pure insurance. So you pay for that. Then there's aggregate, because the other type of risk is everybody it used to cost us $1,000 a month. Now everybody's costing us $1,200 a month, and that could hurt us as well. So that's the 115. So that's the aggregate risk on all your claims in aggregate. So there's two kinds of real risk that you have. The one on an individual really getting a big claim, or then in aggregate your claims run higher than you can really afford to pay. So that 115 is the maximum level that we can pay in a year. So that's like, hey, because we're self-insured, we can't pay 100 because there's obviously, we have to take on more risk to be self-insured, and that cap is at 115.
Right, but where does that surplus come from?
The surplus, because again, like I said, if let's just say for argument's sake, the claims were $100,000 for the whole year, okay? Because we got 115, we pay 115,000.
To who?
At each month, we pay that to Benecon as part of the insurance. So, because if you can do the other way, which is you can just pay the claims as you go, but then you can get hit early because, those claims are usually when you have aggregate, it's by the year. So you could get hit with $1 million in claims in year one, and you would have to, in month one, you would have to pay that. Even because you got 115, that's a year number. It's not a month number, it's a year number.
Okay.
So we pay it. I mean, there's two ways you can pay it as you go.
Mm-hmm.
And then with that protection, but the thing is, it's a yearly protection. So at the end of the year, like I said, if you had $100,000 that you were expecting your claims, you got that $100,000 in month one, you would have to pay that in January. That whole $100,000, and that's kind of a cash flow. So you level it out, and you pay, that whatever that number works out to each and every month, and then whatever's left over, you get back the following year.
Get interest on that when it comes back? No?
So I mean, there's multiple ways to do it, but that one.
No, there is.
But that one is the one that presents the least amount of risk as far as cash flow, because again, we could get hit early on ours.
Okay.
So again, it just rolls into, that's just the way we do it. So again, we had, you can see that it's worked out well for us as far as paying, being self-insured, because we would have gotten more money back than if we had been fully insured. We got 410, 70, 607. You can see we had some pretty big numbers that we've got money back, but we get them back the following year. So it's just the way it plays out, because we're paying the maximum all up front. Pension, everything out there. Balanced budget, again, talking about the balanced budget. It's important to know that without the CARES and Services that we have in there, that 4,001,4089, we would have a negative net income of $1.8 million. So that just tells you how much we're relying on CARES still at this point as we transition with these higher expenses. But with CARES, we're at 2.7. We got to meet the debt service. That 85,000 now number, I didn't get a chance to update, but that number's up based on Doug's latest numbers. Almost over another 10,000 because these interest rates are going up and we are getting higher and higher. And, we're thinking about potentially maybe locking in, but, there's just some things to think about because that loan is locked in, I believe it's June, July, after 24 months of the connector. And then we lock in at that point going forward. So at this point, we're paying interest on it. Just talking about our historical rates and charges, something that we want to keep in mind, because again, we're by resolution, so airports don't really have airlines don't really have contracts. So if our rates get too high, they can leave on 30 days notice. So here, 482, that's what we have in preliminary. We just literally got it back Sunday on our preliminary stuff for landing fees and terminal, and they were significantly higher than those. So the first runs that we do is kind of what we are trying to work with, but those numbers were up well over $2 on the landing fee. That's just looking at paying for those costs without any subsidies. So that just shows you, and then overall airline fees were up 35% on the first run without giving them any share of our CARES. So that's why that CARES is important, to kind of lower their costs to make us more competitive.
When's the last time we did a survey of our competitors in terms of landing fees?
We do it at the end of the year. We did one last year, so I don't know what they are. We usually do them in December of this year, but it takes a few months before we have it. So every year, once I have the latest ones, I put them out there. I think the last one we have is 2021, and it's usually in the, I usually reference it in the executive summary stuff that I put in Novus.
Drawing a blank, I don't remember it last year.
Okay, but I'll bring that up. We do our benchmarking against some of our peers and where our rates are. And this is kind of our budget. I know it's a lot of information up here, but just wanted to kind of walk through where we are. Yeah, thank you, Savannah. So you can see total revenue at the top, a little slightly different than the way we do it with net income. That's total revenue up there, excluding CARES, $38 million. So you can see that number went up almost 17%. That's pushing the envelope as far as revenue, okay? But then you go down to salaries, wages, and benefits, just based on everything that's going on, they're up 14%. Then you look at cost of goods, that's up 78%. And then other operating expenses up 21. So 19.5 versus 16.7 is not sustainable long term. It's just not. But that's just where we are this year. Hopefully that'll stabilize. But that just tells you the market that we're in as far as expenses. 19.5 versus 16.7 is a reason for concern. Then you break down here down to that H that's kind of highlighted there, 5,000,008. And that number, 5,000,008, versus last year's up a little bit. And that is just kind of what's left over to pay debt service and your other capital stuff. So if you go down to the line M, so you can see that the total debt, not even counting debt service, is 6.9 million, and yet we have cash of 5 million without CARES. So those are the things that keep me up at night. Then you go down and see that we got the 4,089,000 that we talked about in line O, and then you can see where we came up with in that number. But if you look at kind of how we come up with net income, slightly different because some of these things are smoothed out over time. You have that little asterisk there for the depreciation. But because capital, the reason we're in accrual-based stuff is because capital, depending on when you purchase it, would throw off your numbers significantly. So you try to smooth it out, and that's what depreciation does. But if you just took H plus O minus Q, you get our net income of $2.3 million. Everybody say that? Just a slightly different way. I know Paul's like, I can't see
Yeah,
it.
a lot going on up there.
Yeah, I try to put it in there so everybody can see it, but again, the most important thing that came in was the M is the one that I focus on, is that total debt. And that's 6.9, and that's 5 million, 5.1 million, and our debt service is 1.25. So we needed that to help cover our debt service.
So if we're looking at 2023, where we're budgeting cash flow short before CARES reimbursement, when do we get out of that? Because we've got, and I'm really oversimplifying this here, but if we've got 4 million in CARES money coming through, we're going to use 2 of that to cover debt service short. We got another year's worth of coverage in the CARES money. That tells me we got a problem in a couple of years if we don't either increase revenue or decrease expenses.
Yes. Welcome to my universe, yes. But again, now for the purposes of debt service, and one of the bankers did ask me that, and I said, that's just the way our agreement's set up. But L is not counted as part of the debt service coverage. So that 1.6 million in leases are not counted as part. It's just the I and J that are counted for the debt service coverage. But again, back to John's point, obviously you want N to be a positive number for sure. That's why we've been bridging this out with this CARES. Last year, was mainly because we weren't up to our traffic level. Now we're at our traffic level, but our expenses are just trying to deal with what's going on in the market these days. That's our challenge. Oops. I lost that. Any other questions? I know I went over a lot of stuff, but it's just good information. I'm glad it was interactive. Because again, we're trying to be good stewards of the money and what we want to do. But it's good to get some feedback from other folks that are looking at this stuff, making sure we stay on course. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Capital Improvement Program Budget Update. Hi, Ryan.
Morning. Everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, great. Yeah, sorry I can't be there in person, but obviously good information to go through. Yeah, so Tom and I were kind of talking about what we wanted to focus on, and given some of the, you can go to the next slide, so that's fine. Given some of the new board members and really what's changed, and even some of the capital projects we've been doing, obviously like with our connector, some might be wondering what the next big projects are really going to be. And I know we've talked about a little bit of them, but what we wanted to do is just kind of outline kind of where we've come in terms of funding history, the projects, really what we look at, and then really what do we see for the next 8 years roughly. And then similar to what Todd mentioned, some of the projects we're looking at, and then in November coming back with the numbers and how everything kind of ties together. So just some recap, some of this, seems information we've talked about, in our capital updates, but really a lot of the packages for the runway rehab project for 624, packages 1, 2, and 3. Package 2 actually had 2 grants. One of them is closed, and one of them is in the process of being closed. Again, Queen City obstruction removal, boarding bridge rehab, the new Braden Terminal building, and then the runway 13 EMAS bed seam seal repair. And just a couple photos. Again, some of this might be redundant from the slides, but again, did a lot of work with the 624 package, finished all of the pavement rehabilitation on the runway. For the next year, we're really looking at the shoulder construction. Again, the marking, lighting, center line lights is a big part of that as well. Again, 13 EMS bed reseal. We did that earlier this year. Boarding bridge rehabilitation, a lot of the boarding bridges. Again, with the paint, structural components and operational components, that was part of that as well. And again, Queen City, obstruction removal, kind of in that top left. A lot of the trees in that photo have been removed, which is kind of what you see there on the bottom, which actually did lift our night approach restrictions for runway 15. So that was a good project, again, FAA funded. And then the Braden Terminal, as we've talked about, and we'll talk about a little bit more in Business Committee, again, getting that state grant fund to get that up at Braden. So what we wanted to do, got some great help from finance, just to make sure we have some good numbers, but wanted to look back a little bit of our investment history. So right now for this year, for 2022, we're projecting to have a approximate total cost of about 25 million in capital spend. We're about 18 million year to date. Really what that means though is if you look at the graph or the table, in 2022, our share, the LNAA share, we're looking is about 8.8 million. And you kind of see, again, some great work from Colin getting our grants, for obviously the connector project, but you can kind of see the ups and downs based on the projects we have and the funding that we get. Obviously, the more blue that you see on there is more of our share. So the more green in terms of a grant is a good thing because it reduces our share. So you kind of see, again, it goes ups and downs. Just for some history, 2017, where you see our share was probably the highest, was actually when we started Hangar 11. At the time, we did not have as many state grants as we ended up getting when we completed the project. And then in 2020, 2021 is really when we were doing a lot of work with the runway rehab program, which again was 90% federal funded and 5% from the state. So you can see our share dropped considerably. And then in 2022, again, with the connector and a lot of the grants that we did not anticipate receiving when we started, that obviously helped our share being where we're thinking about 8.8. And then again, we'll talk more next month about where we're thinking we're going to be next year. But as of right now, looking at a potential same split. But again, our share might come in somewhere around 16 million if all goes according to plan, which we kind of get into a little bit later. But the big thing to focus on here, which it actually kind of shocked me when I looked at it, is over the last 8 years, we've spent a total cost of 166 million on capital improvements. And of that, our share was 68 million, which is about 41%. And the thing to keep in mind is that also includes not just the major projects that you see we talk about every month, but also the equipment and the departmental projects. So vehicle replacements, air handler units, those kind of repairs are included in that number, which gets us to where we've been. So the other piece then in terms of, how do we develop our capital program and just kind of high level going through this, and some of this might be, redundant for some of you, but really how we get there is we start with a master plan and a preferred development plan. So what that does is we work with our consultants to prepare a forecast of our demand. And then in order to meet that demand, what's the required capacity that we need? Again, that's where we got a couple years back to the checkpoint, having that lack of demand or lack of capacity at the checkpoint to meet demand, which is why we're doing the project today. Again, after we go through that, the analysis dictates what projects are needed to meet that demand. And then those projects have to be identified on our airport layout plan or our preferred development plan for the FAA and the state to say, yes, we approve that project and, potentially get funding for it. Once we've gotten the projects, we also phase them by priority based on which facilities are probably in the need of most help, so to speak, to meet demand. But then also it's reviewed annually as things change, whether it's in the market or something that we didn't see as being as strong in terms of demand has really picked up. And again, the biggest piece, obviously, that we've been doing a lot of work on trying to get is really identifying funding opportunities and the timing. So the big thing here is that the program costs, and when I say program costs, we're talking about design, construction management, kind of the whole piece. To align with timing, and you may have heard us said this before with the runway project of doing a lot of ad alternates when we bid, is we do that so if additional funding becomes available from the FAA or if another airport sponsor can't fund a project and money goes back into the system, we can kind of put our hand up and basically say, hey, we could use that extra million or 2 million, which is what happened last year or this past year with the runway. So even if we have something designed, we don't necessarily have to immediately start construction. After we get into the bid phase, we can kind of pause as funding becomes available or as, again, even our LNAA requirements line up with that. So real quick, what we want to do is also go through all three of the airports, just again, a general overview. So at ABE, our airport layout plan was approved in June of 2020 by the FAA. As part of that, we identified phases and set priorities, and you'll see kind of the total cost numbers there in each of the phases, which again, it's really just a guide. It's something that can change annually, as I mentioned, but again, it develops the framework of our CIP, which is where we've been and again, where we're going. So you can see of that phase one, we've actually completed or underway of 5 of the 10 projects. And you kind of see them there. We've talked a lot about them with the runway, the connector, the vertical circulation was originally a separate project to take care of the escalator elevator issue at the end of the tunnel. But again, after looking at it, those projects were combined with the connector based on what we needed. And then Hangar 11, the parking lot, as part of that as well. And going to Queen City, again, same thing. FAA approved that airport layout plan in June of 21. Again, we set phases and priorities there as well. You can kind of see just some of the costs that's forecasted based on the timing. And again, a lot of this is driven by the funding component of it, especially with AB in Queen City being federally obligated, gets federal funding with the projects. So again, as similar to ABE, 3 out of the 10 in progress are completed. Talked about the structure removal, and we're currently getting ready in the spring to do the pavement rehab for 1533, over the next year. And then Braden, again, same thing. So Braden is not federally obligated, but it is obligated through the state, which is where we get our funding as part of that. Our preferred development plan, just a different term of a airport layout plan, was accepted by PennDOT Bureau of Aviation in 2018. Again, we also set priorities with different phases. And same thing there. Again, the terminal building was a big part of that phase 1, which on this graphic is the blue color. And the other projects there is really, potential T-hangar development and non-aeronautical development as part of kind of that first phase. So really what that does, and what we wanted to do is mention some of this, and on the next slide, basically show what we're talking about pictorially on a graphic that you'll definitely see again, but just kind of wanted to walk through some of these pieces. So what we also wanted to do, and we talk about a lot internally, but again, visually, is our projects are really grouped by maybe 3 types, is maintaining existing infrastructure, as Todd kind of mentioned with the capital. So that's your rehabilitation, your reconstruction. There's the projects that accommodate demand and capacity, so passenger demand, air service growth demand, cargo demand, and capacity. And then what we always talk about is generating additional revenue, so your non-aeronautical development, your commercial development, other types of land leases, those types of things. The other piece to that is also considering changes to existing land use to allow for redevelopment. So again, we've talked about this in the past, but you'll see in the next slide is to allow for some of that non-aeronautical development, public parking has to be considered as part of, again, the capacity and demand that we've run into with using our overflow lots, when passenger traffic is peaked throughout the year. Again, as part of this, also looking at various grant programs and local matching requirements. Before we actually started preparing what projects we were going to identify, we had to put together somewhat of a detailed spreadsheet that, I spared the details here, but we can always go through it as projects progress, is maximizing the impact of our local FAA matching dollars. So the bipartisan infrastructure law terminal grant that we got for the connector, which was the $5 million, is a 95% match versus RACP in the state is 50%. So wherever we can maximize those higher percentage funding sources, that's what we'll go through. And as you'll see, we have a lot of priority projects, but it's a matter of honing in on which ones we can get funding, in those different buckets. And then again, as you've seen in our capital project updates, projects can be a single year project versus multi-year. So the runway connector is a multi-year project, and single year could be, like an HVAC replacement or a boiler replacement that we've done a couple years back. As a case in point with this is with the connector. As we were looking back, we actually started the programming in 2016, and then really starting the design in 2017, and here we are in 22, constructing it. So sometimes these do take a while to kind of go through. So this is what we wanted to kind of walk through a little bit, and obviously, jump in if you have any questions, and Tom, if I miss anything as we're going through. But as I mentioned earlier, the different types, you can see on the bottom left the different colors. So going in that order, the orange is really the maintain existing. So runway 624, we've talked about a lot. You can see it there. What we do is basically we got the title, the total cost, which you see the total cost of the program for the runway is 90 million. Our share in parentheses is 3.6. And then the date we have on there is the projected end date. So you can see for the maintain existing, it's really our runways and our taxiways. Right after we get done with 624, we're going to roll into rehabbing taxiway Alpha, which is again is the primary route for air carriers and cargo. And then after that is rehabbing runway 1331, our crosswind runway. So from there, we also, again, I mentioned accommodate demand and capacity. So that's all of the blue. So as we mentioned, as part of our master plan, identified cargo capacity limited from an airside, being an aircraft parking position, and then from an actual warehouse square footage capacity. We do not have what we need to accommodate our existing demand as well as our forecasted demand. So that's kind of what you see up north with some of the cargo development that we're working on. If you go down to the terminal area, we've talked a lot about the passenger boarding bridge, looking at getting an additional bridge there with some state appropriation funding that Colin was really pushing to get. So again, as you see there, $3.4 million. Our share is zero based on what those requirements are. So that's a big piece. Again, you can see the connector. And then Todd mentioned a little bit about building demolition. As you'll see, there's kind of a light blue line over the former government building, and then a darker dashed line kind of adjacent to the terminal. So the reason we're showing that is that as part of our airport layout plan and our forecast is the airside capacity. As our forecast grows and we need to add additional gates, we need to accommodate that future growth without hindering on our non-aeronautical revenue areas, as you'll see there in kind of purple. So that's just shown as to how we designate the areas so that even as we grow, we develop a lot of the non-aeronautical, we're not constricting ourselves to any potential air service growth beyond what we're currently projecting. And then I mentioned a little bit in terms of the non-aeronautical versus capacity. So you'll see with some of the dates that are on there in the generating revenue, we have the air products hangar that they're looking to build by 2024. We've been talking, Darren's talking a lot about the hotel development, showing that kind of on the upper quadrant of the purple, for the next few years. But as part of that, we've talked a little bit about it, but you'll see there is part of that, and it's kind of a blended, but part of that additional capacity is a new signalized airport entrance, just to meet the capacity of our forecasted future, but also during peak times, our current intersection has a level of service of F, which again, the higher the letter, the worse it is in terms of delay time. So again, that's something that we're looking at, and we actually have been working with our engineers to have conversations with PennDOT already regarding that process, and we'll get into what that means really for next year. But you'll see in terms of the timing, prior to being able to develop the rest of, we'll call it the airport road frontage real estate, is really being able to accommodate our existing and future forecasted demand for parking. So that's why we show there, which we've talked a little bit about, next to the terminal, that parking garage, and actually a GSE, which is a ground support equipment storage building. So again, that component is kind of and use piece to make together. And you can kind of see we have the almost beyond 2030, that area kind of on the right where the rental cars are, the existing air products hangar, again, some additional commercial non-aeronautical development would really be predicated on, again, what we could do within that space or what would need to be done prior to. And again, real quick, kind of in the top left, just kind of as a comparison, we look back at the last 8 years, we were somewhere around 166 million total, our share about 68. Without some of the general equipment, as I mentioned, just major projects, we're right around that 53 million LNAA share, total cost of 144. And again, a lot of this isn't necessarily set in stone. It's really our best projection at this point. And as you've heard before, and what we always do is, as we'll get into later, is a lot of these projects are somewhat cash flow restricted in terms of making sure that once we start, we have the funds to complete a project. When we're looking to do it. So moving into 2023, again, just some of the process. We do include contingencies in each project, roughly 10%, and we're actually looking to add kind of an equipment miscellaneous project contingency as well, just because of things we didn't anticipate breaking break or fail that we need to address, from a safety and operational capacity. Again, I mentioned the cash flow, really aligning an ideal schedule, kind of to Todd's point of, we get an expense, we pay it, and then we get reimbursed immediately by the grants is always, it can be done from the federal side, but from the state side, it's a matter of the timing. And so how we kind of play with, how we kind of work through that with our cash flow is something that we identify. In terms of the overall program, you'll see something similar. We might adjust it a little bit, but really from the equipment side is looking at prioritizing those pieces as well of what do we need to maintain existing operations, what are business critical, and some that we don't have a choice that are regulatory in nature that we just have to do throughout the year. And again, looking at some of the equipment, as we've kind of talked about before, I think the other month when we did some previous IT acquisitions, just because of the long lead times, we kind of take a look at that as well with our procurement manager on the timing of a lot of the projects. So after all that, where does that leave us? It kind of points us in the direction of next year looking at 7 major grant projects. And it's probably a little more than last year in terms of how many, but really where that stems from is a good thing is really that the bill funding that for the next 5 years provides an additional 17 million of funding for ABE, which is about 3.5 million a year and about 295,000 a year for Queen City. So what that does is it allows projects that we had in our capital program to kind of shift to align again with that additional funding. So you'll kind of see there we have the 2 runway packages that are currently under grant. The projects without the grant numbers are anticipating award next year, so similar what we've done in years past. The FAA requires the grant applications by, seems earlier and earlier every year, but at least by May, maybe June at the latest, for a grant, August or September. So you'll see there, got the runway, the taxiway delta as we're dealing with cargo, taxiway alpha design for the rehab, which we talked about earlier. Again, the checkpoint will still be under construction, so accounting for that. Any potential using that bill ATP funding we talked about earlier. And then the boarding bridges we talked about as well. And then in terms of Queen City, it's that rehabbing runway 1533 that we've been talking through. And then the second phase for the tail end of next year is really the lighting rehabilitation, and then a new electrical vault as part of that, funded through the FAA. And then in terms of the major non-grant projects, or at least at this point that don't have any grant funding, some of them could in future phases have grant funding, are identified on this list here. Again, they align with what you saw earlier with our kind of 8-year vision or plan. So kind of going down the list, to hit every one, but really looking at some of that commercial non-aeronautical site development, kind of the design or engineering design. We're also looking at applying, actually we just applied this past week for another bill, ATP, the Airport Terminal Program, for a terminal modernization, ADA improvements project, restroom renovations out in the Wiley Concourse. Again, replacing some equipment that requires a bit more engineering and design based on the complexity of the replacement. So we have that in there. Talked a little bit about the new intersection, but really continuing forward with the transportation impact study and moving that forward. Again, looking at starting the process to get us in a position for a parking garage and GSE storage building. Really getting that in place just so we can identify those other non-aeronautical development areas. Hangar 7 restrooms we're currently working in the next year. Again, some equipment for old departure. We had this last year as well, but we combined kind of the miscellaneous pavement repairs, airside, landside, things that either pop up or just some general mill and overlays as part of the landside projects. Looking at the Hangar 7 doors from the original hangar, seeing what we can do there, whether we can rehabilitate them or they need to be replaced as part of that structure. And then the other end of runway 13, that EMAS bed reseal, doing that project as well, which will give us another 5 to 10 year life cycle on that equipment. So I believe this is the last one. So just a couple of photos of what we're looking at for next year. Really what we just talked about, but you can kind of see like that air handler unit 4, for example, a little bit more complex than just a pull and replace, which is why we have to take an engineering design look at it. We've talked a little bit about the Hangar 9 installation, making those repairs as well. So I believe that was the last slide. So I know we kind of went through a lot, but again, just wanted to make the committee aware of really where we're going, what we're looking at, to present next month, in terms of the budgets. But happy to answer any questions.
You want some more information, Frank?
You good, Frank?
Thanks,
Thanks,
Ryan.
Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, then, is there any new business for this committee? Get a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Thank you, we're adjourned.
Do you want to give everybody a minute to stretch after that?
I gotta go, but thanks, I'll see you later.
Thank you.
I mean, or we can jump right in, it's up to you.
James Irwin. I believe he's on the.
Here.
Thank you. Jeff Matskin,
Here.
Glenn Reedman,
Present.
Chris Worley, Tara Zirinsky.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Is there any public comment?
No, sir.
All right, we have one action item, and that's just the approval of the minutes. I'd like to take a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes have the sword. Discussion items. Ryan, try to be less winded, please. We love you and all, man, but that took you out of the room here.
I thought he already did these. I thought he already did.
Yeah, I think he already did these, but we're gonna go through it anyway. We'll start with general aviation.
Yep, not a problem. All right, thanks. All right, so we can go through these pretty quick. But generally, some good updates, we've kind of seen before. Go to the next one, so that. Again, Queen City, 1533 rehab, really all the design that's left is for the electrical work. Again, to look for the grant, mid next year, as well as some grant funding for the electrical vault. So again, still continuing to coordinate that design. In terms of the construction, we have given out the notice of award for the contractor, but we're looking to start that work in the spring as well. So really between now and April or May timeframe, just working through all the submittals to get everything set up to do the actual pavement rehabilitation for that runway. And moving on to Braden, again, kind of talked about the terminal building, but similar last month, certificate of occupancy is received and the operator has started utilizing the space. Got the final inspection from PennDOT, got all of our grant funding. Really the last piece that we're waiting on is putting in a flagpole, and then just from the timing from the materials, we're about 6 weeks out for the front and rear awnings that we're looking to finish. So once we get those, then the project will be officially complete. But really that's where we are now, kind of looking forward to those pieces being done, and obviously getting the space open for the public. But that's really it for GA. I don't know if anyone had any other items or really questions on any of the projects for those.
I don't believe so.
Sweet, great.
We're gonna move
All
on
right,
to
so
the
moving
capital.
on to the, really a lot of these is really just a runway, but really where we are, again, everything on the runway itself's been completed. We're getting close to winter shutdown as well to do the taxiway Echo North, and then that taxiway Alpha 3 area more than likely next spring. But that's kind of where we are today. So this one we talked about before, package one, closeout's been submitted. We were able to submit a grant request for about 1.3 million this past month, just waiting on the final 400,000 until the FAA closes the grant. So again, that's kind of a holding pattern. Package two, all the work's been completed, working on the grant closeout process as well. Hopefully hoping to get that before the end of the year. But again, all project elements with the PAPI and the centerline lights have been completed. Package three, they're currently working on the concrete swale in the north side of the airfield, and then the final markings are scheduled to be completed later in November. Once those are all complete, we can then close this one out as well, more than likely in probably the February or March timeframe. But again, the work should be done by the end of the year, which is great. Package four, again, talked about taxiway Echo North, kind of the green on the bottom right there in the graphic, and then the Alpha 3 or Gulf relocation, which is that connection to the air carrier ramp, will likely be in the spring of next year. Package five, in terms of next year, again, starting in the spring, this is really just the shoulder work along the entire length of the runway. So similar to the Queen City project, just working with the contractor on submittals and get everything ready before kind of hit the ground running in spring of next year. And then in terms of the overview with all the projects of where we are, funding and expenditure wise, you kind of see where we are. Some of them, again, getting close to 100% complete. In terms of funding, all still in the green, and tracking all those accordingly. Any questions on that before we move over to the connector slides?
I don't think so.
All right, great. All right, so go through this one. A lot of good work here as well. You know, a lot of photos, but go through this pretty quick. Obviously, any questions, let me know. We're just over 62% complete. Major work completed since the last meeting. And some of the concrete testing, kind of see there some photos of the walker duct's been installed. The rest of the slab on grade for the connector's been done. You'll see that. And really all of the major HVAC ductwork in the connector is complete. They're now moving on to the bridge and the Wiley expansion. So you kind of see some of the work we're doing there. Working on the drywall, exterior metal panels. Actually started work on the components of the elevator and escalator, so that's exciting to see as well. And we'll kind of go through some of those in the photos. Go next slide. Again, look ahead, really what we're doing there with the electrical ductwork, fire protection. Again, an outside view of the facility. And then the next month should be starting some of the terrazzo mid-November. So that'll be good to see some of those photos as those progress. Again, exterior shot with the bridge. Again, we're seeing some of the metal panels, but still a lot of the plastic up as they continue to move around the space. Again, just another view more of the southwest side. Again, similar view there as well. I'm seeing on the, again, that same side, they got the panels up on the far right. And then that white section in the middle is actually where the windows, future windows are going to go as they progress there as well. Again, just some views. The unit on the left is actually that LifeAir unit that we've talked about before. So that's in place. And then just behind it is the actual air handler as well. I mean, the photos don't really do it justice. Those are two big, massive pieces of equipment on the ceiling. And on the right is actually some of the components of the elevator starting to get put in with the drive rails and shaft there. Again, another view of the vertical circulation core, actually in the middle, right where that lift is. Most of the exterior panels have been put up there as well, so they're continuing to move around this side as well. Again, some different shots. The far left is in the bridge looking back to the connector. Again, see some of the ductwork, conduits, and fire suppression. And then the other two are actually under the bridge itself. Again, what needs to go in there with the fire suppression, supports, and then some of the siding. Again, we talked about this a little bit before. This is the walker duct, which is really kind of that conduit path underneath the concrete and terrazzo. So that's all set up prior to the concrete pour. And then this is actually when they were pouring the concrete. You can actually see the concrete boom basically through the windows all the way across. So again, just a lot of coordination with what they need to do there. And then that's some of the completed space. You can see again the walker duct and those the circle access points. Go next one, so that kind of the same view from the other side. And then again, kind of where they are with the elevators and some of the cladding around it, some of the drywall with the TSA offices on the left-hand side. Again, going up the stairwell, just some of the soffits and some of the construction there. And then this is actually looking back into the bridge. This is actually in the basically the old concession space in Wiley. So you can see that's all opened up. And then the kind of the elevators to the left, the future spot for the elevators there. Again, this is down in the tunnel, coming down for the future escalator, stairs, and elevators kind of on the left. Again, going through the phasing, as you've seen before, working on the core, waterproofing the existing tunnel, kind of was the first phase. In terms of where we are percentages, you can kind of see as we're progressing over last month, the vertical core, about 74% now, and then the overall project, as we mentioned, about 62%. again, phase 2, as we're working through, obviously closing up the building with the shell, cleaning up the site a little bit, working on the elevators and escalators, obviously commissioning and then opening the new the vertical circulation and the checkpoint. And then phase 3, once that's complete, is obviously getting rid of the old equipment in the tunnel, and renovating that space as well. So not much has changed here. I mean, we talked about some of the grant funding we received last month that's been added to the slide. We're basically at around 93% funded in terms of eligible costs. You can see kind of where we're tracking expenditures to date, just about half spent, about 15 million. The only change on here, which is actually a good thing, is actually coordinating a date with TSA on the TSA equipment delivery. So we're showing January of 23, but we are working towards an actual date that we'll coordinate. But we are doing also bi-weekly calls with the TSA, which helps keep that in line as well. I believe that's it. Tried to hit the highlights, not be too long-winded. Any questions on that?
Any questions for Ryan? Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you.
Any new business? All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Take note for, oh, Frank's not here anymore. Never mind. I'll pick on him tomorrow. All right.
Okay, I'm just waiting for the agenda to come up. Okay, we'll just roll right in. I don't think we need to take another break. So we'll go ahead and call the executive committee meeting on October 24, 2022 to order. Sylvette, could you call the roll, please?
John Hayes,
Here.
Glenn Reedman,
Present.
Justin Grimshaw,
Here.
Mike Stershik, Tara Zirinsky, Matt Turk. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment?
No, sir.
Okay. We have a few action items, but I want to just alert everyone that we're going to be taking action items number 3C, 3D, and 4B, and actually 4A as well. We're going to cover all of those in exec session. So they're all related to personnel matters and data security and network integrity, which I assume, Counselor, are subject to exec session. Okay, thank you. So first item on the agenda for the action items is approval of the meeting minutes of September 22nd. They were circulated via email. Entertain a motion to approve.
I'll move.
Motion, second.
I'll second.
Do you have any additions, deletions, or corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor of the subject motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next is approval of the Florio Perucci invoice for September 2022. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So move.
Have a motion, second. Have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the subject motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, does anyone have anything they want to cover outside of executive session before we go in? Okay, hearing none. Now, we will have votes coming out of exec session. So I wanted to basically alert the public to that. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to go into executive session.
So move.
Have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, Colin, let us know when we're out.
Do we need to do this?
Okay. Yeah, we do. We have to vote the table. Okay, we're back now from executive session. Attorney Marcon, can you outline for
Yes, Chairman.
record purposes, please?
The committee held an executive session to discuss CBA for the firefighters, also security measures, including cybersecurity, and no voting or deliberations or decision-making occurred during the session.
Okay, thank you. I'd entertain a motion to table discussion and approval of the IAFF Local 2227 Collective Bargaining Agreement.
Make that motion.
So move, second.
Second.
Have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the subject motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. And I'd now entertain a motion to table approval of the non-union wage adjustments.
I'll make that motion too.
I have a
Let's
motion
get a
on the,
second from somebody on the committee.
I'll second.
any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the subject motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Want to get John out of here?
Okay, do we have anything else for discussion or review at the executive committee today? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Have a motion, we're good. Thank you, everyone, appreciate it. We'll see you at the board meeting tomorrow, noon.
And we do have a tour of the connector if people are interested tomorrow.
Will do.
No flip-flops, no Crocs.
No Crocs.
Oh, thank you, Tom.